At ZA-042, a system associated with Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 responded to a signal. This response occurred after the aircraft had already disappeared from radar. There was no crew transmission, no confirmed position, no acknowledged flight path. And yet, something answered. Not as communication, as continuation. This is not a theory about disappearance. It is an examination of what happens when an event does not complete its transition into the past. This is not the beginning of a story. This is a breach, a rupture where sequence was expected to hold and failed without warning. You are not supposed to be here yet because this access window was never designed to reopen. It was sealed by assumption, not by closure. MH370, the interval that should not exist, when an event refused to close. Systems do this often. When verification becomes expensive, they replace certainty with assumption. They do not confirm that something has ended. They mark it as ended and move on. Closure, in this sense, is not a physical condition. It is an administrative act, a declaration that allows structure to continue operating without interruption. Reality is expected to comply afterward, but an event does not end because it is declared finished. It ends when it completes its transition into the past, when it becomes inaccessible except through memory. What you are hearing was not archived, categorized, or placed into memory. It was never labeled as past. It was never sealed into history. When records replace reality, sequence appears intact, but appearance is not confirmation. An archive can exist without an ending ever occurring. Most events end because time carries them away, dissolving them into sequence. This one did not move when it was supposed to. It stayed exactly where progression failed. Stalling is not stillness. Suspension is not rest. An event can remain active without advancing, persistent without momentum. Systems are not built to perceive this state. They detect motion, cessation, escalation, collapse. They do not detect continuity without direction. So when an event does not stop, yet refuses to proceed, it becomes invisible to interpretation. You are not listening to a recording. You are standing inside a structure that still reacts to presence, still holds tension without release, still waits without expectation. It does not advance because advancement would require permission, and permission was never renewed. This is not about disappearance. Disappearance is a category error. It assumes collapse into absence. This is about persistence without permission, about something that continued after the rules stopped applying. If this feels unstable, that is because stability depends on resolution. If this feels like an error, it is because it never resolved into an ending. The interval is already aware of you, not as an observer, as pressure, and the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave. Because exit requires sequence, and sequence is compromised here. Most events complete themselves without effort. They move forward, collide with consequence, and dissolve into memory. History depends on that motion. It assumes that whatever happens will eventually finish happening. This one did not. MH370 did not collapse into wreckage, explanation, or certainty. It reached a point where progression was expected and remained suspended there. This was not delay. Delay still implies arrival. This was interruption without resumption, a halt that never became an ending. When an event fails to complete, it does not disappear. It loses its place in the timeline. It becomes something else entirely. Most tragedies resolve by force, impact, fire, silence. This one refused that path. There was no final image to archive, no last frame the world could point to and say, this is where it ended. Instead, the event stayed open, not active like news, active like an exposed circuit, waiting without intent, responsive without direction, unresolved without decay. Some events do not end, they stall. Flight is not movement through space. It is movement through permission. Every second in the air is approved, echoed, acknowledged, position offered, system answers. Time advances only because something confirms it may. When confirmation fails, motion does not stop, meaning does. MH370 continued after permission was withdrawn, not because it broke the rules, but because the rules stopped applying to it. The chain of authorization dissolved quietly, no alarm, no rupture. This is how structural failures occur, not through spectacle, through silent expiration. The aircraft kept moving inside a timeline that was no longer being validated. We are trained to believe that when systems stop responding, reality halts with them. But reality does not require acknowledgement to persist. The aircraft did not announce itself anymore. It did not request continuation. It simply assumed it. In aviation, this is impossible. In time, it is not. When confirmation stopped, clocks did not freeze, engines did not shut down, only interpretation failed. The aircraft did not disappear. The sequence did. Sequence is a contract, an agreement between cause and effect that promises closure. What happens when a contract expires mid-event? The event becomes orphaned, still active, no longer obligated to finish. The moment the event turned around was not a maneuver. It was a refusal. Forward motion assumes a future waiting to receive you. Backward motion assumes a past willing to release you. What happened here belonged to neither. The aircraft changed direction after sequence had already broken, not as correction, not as escape, as if progression itself had been rejected. Direction usually describes space, but what changed here was not spatial intent, it was temporal behavior. The event stopped behaving like something on its way to an outcome. It began behaving like something that intended to remain. Turning back did not mean returning. There was nothing to return to. From this point on, nothing that observes this event can fully exit it unchanged. From this point on, the flight obeyed persistence, not routes, continuing not because it was going somewhere, but because stopping would have meant resolution. And resolution was no longer available. It did not go back. It stayed. Existence does not require visibility. It only requires continuity. After the event slipped out of sequence, it did not vanish. It remained present without agreeing to be seen. We believe what cannot be located cannot be real. But visibility is a privilege granted by systems, not a property of existence. The event continued to respond without revealing itself, not hiding, not fleeing. Existing beyond the frames meant to contain it, active without address, responsive without position, present without permission. This condition is intolerable to perception. Misalignment is not distance. Something can be close enough to register and too offset to decode. The mind senses presence without access, pressure without cause, response without source. We search not to find, but to restore coherence. Inside an interval, borders dissolve. An event can echo, exert pressure, leave effects, and still remain unreachable. This is not invisibility. This is incompatibility. The world searched because it assumed the event had finished. Search requires closure. Every grid, every scan, every announcement assumed the same thing, that the event had collapsed into a location. But an interval does not wait, it persists. The search did not fail because it was careless. It failed because it was early. You cannot triangulate what is still unfolding. You cannot recover what has not finished happening. Signals do not require intention. They require continuation. Long after the voice disappeared, something kept responding, not with words, with acknowledgement, not communication, reflex. The event answered because answering was embedded in its structure, automatic, involuntary. Each response was minimal, just enough to confirm the system had not powered down. These were not messages, they were residue. The event was not speaking, it was still breathing. An unresolved structure does not drift away. It stabilizes in proximity, close enough to interfere, close enough to be felt. Distance protects the mind by converting events into memory, but proximity dissolves that protection. This event did not retreat into the past. It remained adjacent to the present, pressing lightly, constantly, without escalation, not demanding attention, inviting it. Time usually acts as a solvent. It breaks pressure into narrative. It turns tension into sequence. But when time fails to dissolve an event, pressure remains intact, not explosive, compressive. The longer it remains, the more structure forms around it, not because it grows, because interpretation begins to bend. The present adjusts itself to accommodate what should no longer be here. And slowly, without notice, the abnormal becomes tolerated. We assume reality resists contradiction, that incompatible states cannot coexist. But reality tolerates incompatibility as long as it remains unexamined. This event exists in that tolerance. It does not violate physics. It bypasses expectation. It occupies a region where rules do not fail loudly. They simply stop being consulted. The structure holds because nothing insists on resolving it. And nothing insists because resolution was never confirmed as possible. This is why the event feels close without being reachable. It is not distant. It is misaligned, like a signal slightly out of phase, close enough to register, too offset to decode. A stalled event does not remain neutral. It exerts influence without intent, not direction, pressure. Systems near it begin to compensate. Measurements drift. Expectations soften. Interpretation becomes cautious, then permissive. Nothing breaks at once. Reality adjusts by degrees. This is how anomalies persist, not by overpowering structure, but by teaching structure to live with them. Time inside an unresolved structure does not behave as a line. It behaves as a field. Every moment is equally weighted. No second is privileged as beginning or end. Cause does not advance. Effect does not arrive. Everything that happens remains present, not remembered, not anticipated, held. Perception relies on contrast. Before and after, then and now. Inside an interval, contrast erodes. Differences blur without merging. The mind searches for transition and finds only persistence. This is not disorientation. It is saturation, too much continuity, too little change. Exposure to an unresolved event is not dramatic, it is cumulative. Each moment inside it removes a small amount of certainty, not enough to alarm, enough to alter orientation. Leaving does not restore what was lost. Distance returns, sequence resumes, but alignment does not. Something remains slightly offset, because once continuity is observed without closure, the expectation of endings never fully recovers. Inside a stalled event, time does not rush. It thickens. Moments do not pass into memory. They accumulate. This is not panic. Panic peaks. This never does. Attention circles incomplete actions. Hands return to controls because nothing confirms completion. Stress burns and fades. Suspension corrodes. Effort does not become outcome. Action does not become past. Fear loses shape because fear seeks an ending. Inside an interval, nothing finishes, including fear. Intention assumes an arc. Inside this structure, arcs collapse. Who acted becomes irrelevant when action produces no ending. Why dissolves when cause never reaches effect? Control requires closure. Closure is what this structure refuses. Fragments do not mean collapse, they mean leakage. Material escapes while the structure remains intact. Debris calms the mind by suggesting progress. But inside an interval, progress is illusion. Fragments escape. The event does not. Unresolved events do not go silent. They remain attentive. They stay adjacent to the present, close enough to react. This event does not wait to be remembered. It waits to be entered. You are no longer outside this structure. Observation ended the moment attention stabilized. Watching is entry. The event expands around you. Time loops, language presses instead of clarifies. This is no longer about what happened. That distance is gone. This access was never stable. There is no closing statement here, no resolution waiting. What ends now is not the event, it is your proximity. The structure remains, unfinished, unarchived. This is not an ending, it is a withdrawal. The event continues, just not with you inside it.